with mortgage, they have to know what zones they're in, and we still have zones, but they have to know what zones they're in to determine whether or not they're going to require flood for a loan. So anything in the A zones and the V zones, they're going to continue to require flood insurance. So we're obviously going to be they're going to be pulling flood zones to determine whether or not they're going to require it. We're going to be pulling flood zones as well. There is no more preferred risk flood policies for people who want to opt to have flood insurance, even though they're not required to have it. And the rates for those properties that are closer to the water that had $450 to $800 preferred risk policies have changed dramatically. They've gone way, way, way up. But the houses that are inland have gone way down. So it's been a blessing for them. There is still a 30-day waiting period for anyone who purchases flood that is not connected to a loan closing. And when you have a loan closing and they're required to have flood, it has to match, the flood insurance policy has to match the loan closing date. Otherwise, there is an imposed 30-day waiting period in which if a flood does occur, that the federal government can deny any coverage. There's always been a controversy about that, but that is a fast and hard rule. The coverage has to match the closing date. Some people try to get around it. Now, if they have coverage already in effect, that's fine, as long as it was in effect more than 30 days prior to the closing date. There is, has anybody in this group heard of a LOMA or a LOMER? I see Sarah nodding her head. That's when someone's up on higher ground and maybe their flood zone changed from an A zone to an X zone at some point and then changed back to an A zone. They can apply to see if they can change back to an X zone so they don't have to have flood insurance. So those are still in effect and they can still do that. The $250,000 maximum coverage through the federal program is still the same. And the rates for rate increases, the maximum that they can go up is 18% still. That hasn't changed. We can still transfer policies from one seller to one buyer. That hasn't changed. But grandfathered policies, once they come up for renewal again after March 31st, will no longer be eligible for the grandfathered zone. They will have to be rated in the new 2.0 and be subject to the rates for that particular residence. That's going to hurt the people, especially the ones that are in the VE zone, and that's the coastal, along the Chesapeake Bay, in the Lynnhaven River, and of course, the Atlantic Ocean. Some of them are grandfathered. I mean, I have policies that are grandfathered in the A zones and a few that are grandfathered back into the C zones, way back. So they're going to be hit with some rather high rates. And there's nothing we can do about it. Now, the alternative to the federal program, of course, are private policy rates. And some of them are very, very competitive. And as long as they adhere to the wording and adopted to the federal guidelines, they are accepted by the banks. I do want to bring up Haley, the first flyer
I
that it
got it,
was put
Haley.
up by FEMA? You got it, Tim?
I got it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
See it?
There's something about bad network quality. Okay. These are a couple flyers that FEMA has put out, and it shows you some of the diagrams and the foundations. What they're looking at as far as rating is where is the living area. Of course, something on a slab. Let me move this down a little bit. Slab on grade, of course. If it's a basement and non-elevated, they're going to be rating it based on anything sunken. Of course, a crawl space. The living area is going to be elevated, so they're going to be looking at how high up it's going to be. Elevated, like the houses in Sandbridge and some of those over in Buckrow Beach, elevated without any enclosure underneath of it. And then there's some that are elevated with an enclosure underneath of it. And then there's some that are elevated on piles, but they are enclosed on the bottom. It's important to note that we have to know where the machinery for the home is located, whether or not it's on that living floor or whether or not it's in a crawl space or it's in an enclosure underneath the living floor, because that is an exposure for the flooding. If it is a compressor on the outside, how high is that up off the ground? And that's what they're looking at for rating purposes. Flood openings, we have to have flood openings that are 1 inch to every square foot on any enclosure, and that could be the enclosed portion like it is with this elevated with enclosure, or the crawl space. And it's important that if they have the flood openings, that they get a bigger discount if they are the engineered openings, because the engineered openings count for more square footage. They might be 10 by 12, but they might count for 1,000 square feet. So the lowest floor elevation is what they're really looking for. And there's a difference between being under 5 feet or over 5 feet. There's a huge difference in the rating. Let me also point out that any of you that work new construction sites, for those people that are building, there is a surcharge for new home construction for your builders. I had one the other day that I had quoted prior to the October 1st date, and it was a $571 premium because he used a $5,000 deductible, and he did not close in time for that on his loan. And after October 1st, it went to $2,371 for the same coverage. It was $250,000 with a $5,000 deductible. So there is a surcharge for that. But once the house is complete, the rate changes completely. So the date of construction, the lowest floor of the elevation are significant in the rating process now. They were before, but there was a lot more discounts applied to the policies than they are now. My firm belief is, with the way that they've changed this structure and some of the rating that I've seen, I think the federal government's going to lose money on this new rating system. The square footage is a big big part of the rating system, and the replacement cost. We have to do a replacement cost for them now. The number of floors that they have is significant in the rating process, and how the residence is going to be used, whether it's primary, secondary, or a rental. The primary residence, there is a residence surcharge. It's called a HIFA, and that HIFA charge is $25. I'm getting an echo.
I got
Somebody-
you fixed.
Okay. It's a residency charge is $25 for a primary residency, and it's $250 for a secondary residence or a rental. And anytime we're transferring a policy from one to another, that could change. If we're changing it from a primary residence to a secondary or rental, then we have to collect additional premium for that. And if we're changing it from a secondary or a rental back to a primary, there is a refund. But that refund goes to the buyer, because the buyer is going to be paying the seller based on how the policy reads at the closing. If you don't understand that, I'll explain it to you a little bit later. All right. Some of you, depends on how much time you've been in the business, you've heard of pre-firm and post-firm. Pre-firm is anything that was built prior to December 31st, 1974, and firm is an acronym for flood insurance rate map, and we still have flood insurance rate maps. Post-firm is after that date. For those things that are pre-firm, the rates are higher because there was no flood insurance rate maps. So there was no rules or regulations or ordinances as to how the house had to be built. After that date, then there were, and there are discounts. So if they qualify and their houses are up a significant elevation, they can qualify for the post-firm rates. Down, Tim?
I'm out of space.
All right, go to the
That's it.
next page. And this will give you a lot more information.
This is all I have on this page, on this one. So you
Okay.
want me to go to the other flyer?
No, you haven't done this page yet. You just did the other one. I think. Nope. No, you're done on that one.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I just wanted to mention that FHA still does not allow private flood insurance companies. We can do it on a conventional, a jumbo, VA,
Mhm.
but FHA is still not allowing the private flood
They're always behind.
always.
Always. It doesn't matter what it is.
And then my only question was, I know you said
Mhm.
that elevation certifications are not always required anymore. So when are they?
We can still use them.
And that does
we-
help if it's kind of a questionable
It
situation.
can help. We try it both ways, and if it doesn't help, we won't use them. It's not mandatory. Another thing that we have to use in some, and I ran into this the other day. I had a piece of property that did not have an address. This is new construction. It had a street, and it had a legal address, but I had to get a longitude and latitude for them to be able to spot on the land where the house was going to be built. And that's something we haven't ever had to do before. So that was something unusual. We had to get a program to be able to do that. It's different. So,
All right, I just had a question come in, and
Yeah.
these flyers have been attached to the calendar invite.
Mhm.
So if you accepted the calendar invite through Outlook, you have these flyers on your calendar. If you didn't accept the invite, then they will be attached to the email inviting you with this link. If you do have any issues with receiving those, if you'll send an email to training@BHHS Town, and we'll get them to you. But otherwise, we think most of you, or the majority, or all of you, should have them in one of the two places, either attached to the calendar invite or via the email that came if you didn't accept it. Right.
Yeah, and you're welcome to print them off and give them to clients because they are FEMA documents, and they can be given out to anyone. And you, I'm in the directory, so you're welcome to give them my number if they have any questions. The other flyer is about basement flooding. A lot of questions come up about that. Obviously, in this particular area, we don't have too many houses. Ghent is a good example, but we do have some. We even have some in Virginia Beach. We have some over on the peninsula that have basements, and there are limited things. Contents in a basement are not covered, so don't expect to receive any coverage for it. It's limited to central air conditioners, for electrical outlets, light switches, furnaces and hot water heaters, sump pumps. Right. When I say contents, I mean furniture and clothing and your Christmas boxes of Christmas stuff, but clothes, washers and dryers, window air conditioners, freezers and contents. That's it. But if it's a game room or a bedroom or a recreation room of some sort or a storage room, there is no coverage for flooding of any of those things in a basement or anything underground whatsoever. And they and I haven't seen any coverage for any of that in a private policy either. The private policies are a little bit different in as much as you can get some. Now, I'll bring this up. A lot of questions have come up, especially with the private introduction of the private policies. There is no loss of use coverage on the FEMA policies. And when I say loss of use, if somebody has flooding, and I'll go back to, I think it was Hurricane, was it Michael, that flooded out several areas in the vicinity. One was over in Windsor Woods or Windsor Oaks, and people had so much flooding they couldn't live in their houses for a long time, and they had to throw everything out. There is no coverage to set them up like you do have in a homeowner's policy in a hotel or an apartment or anything to live while their houses were being rebuilt or renovated due to the flooding. There's no coverage in that. There is something in the Biggert Waters Act for that to eventually, maybe sometime in our lifetime, to be presented into the Flood Insurance Act. I haven't heard anything about it, but in some of the private policies, you can purchase some coverage for that. So that can be advantageous. And I will tell you, there have been some companies that have written some policies for a while, and then they've backed off on some of the types of policies that they've written. Condominium, residential condominium, the RCBAP. They were writing that for a while, and most of them have backed off of that. So we only have the federal government policy for residential condominium association policies. But it's expanding. More companies are coming out with the private policies, and that's what the federal government wants. My opinion is the federal government needs to get out of the flood business. I've been doing this since 1975. Gone through a lot of changes with the federal government and the flood business. They still don't know how to do it. they just shouldn't be in the insurance business. They did get smart, and they did several years ago buy insurance on the federal flood program. They finally got some insurance, just like the insurance companies do. They buy insurance on their insurance products, and I don't think they can buy enough insurance on the federal flood program because, you hear about mudslides, and you hear, we're having problems out in the West now where they've had all the fires. When they do have rain, then they have mudslides, and those are covered under the federal flood program if people have purchased flood insurance. We have problems when the Mississippi rises. We have problems when we have a lot of the ice melts, with people losing their homes or having flood problems. That's covered by flood insurance. And then, of course, we have hurricanes. We're blessed this past year that we didn't have a problem with hurricanes. Yes, Sarah. And hopefully, and we haven't, for the most part, in the last several years. We did have that Isa, whatever his name was, in 2020 that did some damage, but that was about it. So keep our fingers crossed. We're under the La Nina right now. So hopefully this winter we won't have any difficulty with ice melts, snow melts, causing a difficult problem with flooding, because she causes problems too. We usually do better under El Nino. La Nina is usually what causes problems for us. So in any case, encourage your homeowners, if you're listing a house, to keep up with their flood insurance. As I said, we can still, excuse me, we can still transfer policies, and sometimes that can be good for them. But we always look, and except for in the FHA, we can always look at a private policy to see if that's better for them, price-wise, coverage-wise, because we can get more coverage through the private policies as well, more than the $250 on a residence. And a lot of people want more coverage than just the $250, especially if they're closer to the water. We also do write excess flood insurance policies. In some cases, I know as a bank, we do, with Town Bank, we do require more than just the $250, depending on how close they are to the water. So that's something to think about. Anybody have any questions?
All right. If anybody has questions, type them in the chat, raise your hand, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
And I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you talk about the difference between, so for example, at my house, I'm not in a flood zone that requires me to carry flood insurance, but
Right.
my basement does flood because of excessive rain coming down and power being cut off. And I think of Norida, I think it was in 2007, 2009, something where the basement flooded and the power was off, so the sump pump couldn't pump.
Right.
And so the difference between rainwater going into the water and the rising water level.
Yeah. The definition of flood is rising water and tidal wave action. Rising water in this particular area is generally caused by rainwater that collects and rises. The problem that we have, we had this problem last winter, this past winter, and we have that problem usually in June, where we have significant rains and the ground is so saturated it has nowhere to go. And as a result, when it does rain or we have a tropical area come close to us, the water has nothing to do but rise. And as Sarah mentioned, those people that have basements, or the water can also go into the crawl spaces, that's considered flooding.
So this
So,
past weekend when we had that incredible king tide,
oh
4 nights in
yes,
a row or
yep,
something, I was
yep.
down near the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk at high tide, and it was,
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
horrible.
it's
Yeah,
just unbelievable.
downtown Norfolk.
So that doesn't
That's
count.
that does count. That's
Oh, it
flooding.
does count. Okay.
It does counting. That's
Okay.
yeah. Um, we have that problem in downtown Norfolk all the time. Um, they don't have any means to get that water out of there. They eh, the other problem is so much of the drainage is old. Until they get all of that drainage replaced with larger drain pipes that can carry that water out of there, it's going to continue to happen. It's just it's not going to stop. You know, anywhere Portsmouth is the same way. We have areas in Portsmouth the same way, and of course back in Virginia Beach, in the Pungo area, we don't have any drainage because they don't have any sewer system. Everything is on a it's just it's drain it drain. A lot of that has little streams all through it in the Pungo area, and those fill up, and then it just goes all over the land. So there until they um, get that out into that area, and that's going to be years and years, since probably past my lifetime. It's going to continue to do that too. And whether it's part of the new legislation or new um, thing that we just voted on in the last um, polls, whether or not I don't know. Some of it is, I think, but not enough that it's going to make a whole lot of difference. They
Well,
can't put enough trenches next to the road to carry it all out.
Well, this is great information. I did also want to mention that if a
Mm-hmm.
borrower does not wish to escrow for their taxes and insurance,
Mm-hmm.
they are not allowed to waive escrows on flood insurance. Flood insurance has to be escrowed. So I just want to
Right.
make sure everybody knows that.
Well, and I know that with a lot of the lending institutions, they have they instituted that. I know some of them have allowed it, but most of them are not allowing that. I don't know if that's a federal thing.
I think it's a federal thing.
It's a federal thing now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they just want to make sure people who are supposed to have flood insurance have flood insurance.
Well, I mean, they are the ones that required it. When I first came into the business, it was when Norfolk came into the flood program. And for those of that you don't know, when a community comes into the flood program, they have to go in the emergency program, and there's only $35,000 of coverage available on a home. That's it, until they qualify for the regular program and have the 250 available under the federal program. So. It was amazing. Now, back then, there were houses that you could replace for $35,000. But be that as it may, it was an evolving program. Um, so it's amazing that things have evolved to that point. I wish they would elevate the coverage. They've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, but they can't even handle the 250, much less increase the coverage. They go broke every year, even with the extra insurance that they buy, because it's not managed well enough. It's like with most things, the people that put the programs together are not the people that are involved with the program. The legislators are not involved in the program, using it and maintaining it.
All right, so we need some legislative support.
Well, even then, they're still not the ones that are actually out there managing the program, managing the coverages, and working with the people in the community.
Gotcha. All right, any other questions for Debbie? Anybody, anything? I
Debbie,
did. Yep, go
Yeah.
ahead.
if a property has an RPL policy, a repetitive loss policy,
Yes.
and you are going into 2.1, is that 2.1, is the new program going to
Yes,
allow
2.0.
or 2.0, is that going to allow the RPL policies to be readjusted downwards, or is that RPL fixed?
It's fixed. They're stuck in that program for at least 20 years from the last loss.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The exception is that some of those, I have some people that have elevated their houses 15 feet.
And so if we do elevate a house to that level, then we would be guaranteed the reduction, the new rate at 2.0, or is it still going to be a maybe?
I'm going to say it's a maybe, although I have seen a couple of these come out of that. In my particular instance, my clients were involved in receiving a grant through the federal government.
Right.
And they were elevated 15 feet. And they were able to get out of the RPL.
Excellent.
RLP. Yep.
All right, Debbie, this is a good point. I think, can you give us the best telephone number to reach you if people have questions on a one-on-one individual basis for different questions?
Yeah, I work from home Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those are the best days to call me. I am in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'm deluged by questions from my coworkers when I'm in there. So the best number to get me at is 418-2023. That's my cell phone number. And even when I'm in the office, because we're on a computer generated, I don't know how many of y'all are on Jabber, but Jabber and I don't get along. So I have all my calls routed through to my my cell phone. I get much better reception.
And since we have a new area code, I'm guessing it's 757.
It's
still.
757. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't even know. I don't even
Yeah,
know
you
what is the new area code? Anybody have it?
948, I believe.
948. I got to write that down.
All
I
right,
don't write it down. I'm going to think it's a foreign.
Foreign number.
Yeah, foreign number.
Kathy Worthen, you have a question? Go ahead.
On the actual legislation or the things that Virginia Beach just voted on,
Yes.
has that been actually approved, and how much is it going to increase each person's bills? Do we know?
I have no idea. I mean, it's going to affect us all in our real estate tax, but I don't know that they've said exactly the percentage or number of dollars.
So it's been accepted, they voted on it, but nothing's been approved, or it won't be in effect till a certain day.
No, obviously, I don't think that unless they've already worked it out, whether or not it's going to be effective January 1 or not.
Okay, just wanted to update. And Tim, just a question, when that actually gets approved and started, can you send out like a group email or something from the brokers or something?
Sure. We'll make sure the managers share that information.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions? All right.
Oh, repeat on my number, 757-418-2023.